WSOU 89.5. I am Patrick, and I'm here with the great Rick Beato. Rick, how you doing today?
Good, Patrick. How are you?
I'm doing fine. How's the first day of October treating you?
It's beautiful here in Atlanta. Beautiful day. So you doing all right?
Yeah, I'm doing just fine. Weather in South Orange is great. So for those of you who don't know Rick, he is a YouTube content creator, but before that, you were also a college professor, a professional musician, and then a producer for acts like Shinedown and Need to Breathe. You produced for metal acts up until 2016 when you started posting to YouTube. So I think I want to start from the beginning. How did your first experience as a recording artist with an audio engineer prompt you to teach yourself how to produce?
When I went into recording with my old band, Billionaire, I really didn't know anything about recording, and we had some issues during the making of the record with the guy that produced it, and I essentially never wanted to be in that position again. So I taught myself recording engineering and started producing bands on my own.
Now, what was the first production gig that you got that wasn't producing for your own band, your own music?
I produced a band called Left Front Tire, my first project, and one of the songs got on the American Pie 2 soundtrack. And this is a kind of a pop punk band. I did it in my friend's basement on 16-track analogs back in '99.
That's cool. Now, how did you transition from that to your first heavy metal production gig?
I was working with a lot of local bands here in Atlanta, and basically that's the type of music that was going on then. It was metal, new metal in '99. It was basically pop punk, some emo, and new metal. Those were the genres that were really big at the time. So those were the bands that I worked with. So it wasn't necessarily that I was trying to work with metal bands. It's just that that's what the projects that were coming my way at the time.
And what was the Atlanta music scene like at the time you started producing these bands that were locally based?
That was kind of the scene. There were other bands that besides my band. There's a band called Marvelous 3 that my good friend Butch Walker played in that had gotten a record deal. There's a band called Double Drive that had gotten signed to MCA Records. That was more of a metal band. All of which I'm still friends with the guys in all those bands. And so there was a really vibrant scene that was happening in Atlanta, but the production stuff that I did primarily were, I would say new metal kind of things. And then it started to branch out. It wasn't really, there were just a few bands from Atlanta I produced. Then it was bands from the Southeast. Then it was bands from everywhere, from all over the country, and even, bands from Europe and things like that. So it spread out pretty quickly.
So one of your most impressive metal production credits is Leave a Whisper by Shinedown. How did you get connected with Brent Smith, and what was your first experience with him like, and working with the band?
So his A&R person, the guy that signed him, was a friend of mine, Steve Robertson. And I had done a project that got signed for Atlantic Records. I can't remember the band's name now. It's a long time ago. So he called me up. He says, I've got this guy, Brent Smith, that I signed. And Brent, he says, he's a phenomenal singer. I want you to go down and write it, see if you guys connect writing songs. And he was down in Jacksonville. And I went down there and met with him. And first song we wrote was a song called Lost in the Crowd, which is on that first Shinedown record. And then we wrote, I think, a song called In Memory. I mean, it's hard to remember. We wrote, I think, 4 songs together, something like that. I produced 5 songs. I can't remember exactly from the record, but yeah, so we just started out and just hit it off right off the bat. And Brent is one of the most amazing singers. I'd love to work with Brent. And Brent's an incredibly nice guy. I saw that you guys have interviewed him on your radio station there.
Yeah,
He's the best.
Valentino interviewed Brent. He's a great guy. Now, from
Yeah.
the video you made about him, he was the time you met him, he was staying in Ronnie Van Zant's wife's guest house, right?
Yes.
Well, what was your first impression of him when you came in and saw that this was these were his digs and this is how he was making music at the time?
I thought it was cool. He had there was a mattress with a sheet on the floor and 4 plastic bags that had all those belongings in it, and that was it. That's all he had. He had long hair, and beard, and but when I heard his voice, I was just blown away. I mean, he's just one of the best singers ever. He's incredible.
That's really interesting. You said you said you were really impressed by his singing when you first heard it, right?
Oh, he's unbelievable. Just his first things that came out of his mouth. I started playing that beginning of that Lost in the Crowd song, and he just started singing immediately. He had a verse, and I think we just did the verse and the chorus right off the bat. He just improvised it. It was amazing. We had a cassette player running. I wish I could find the cassette, because I remember sending it to the A&R guy, playing for him over the phone. I held my phone up to it, and he's like, "That's amazing. Keep going." So
were a lot of the songs that you wrote with Brent kind of like that, on the spot, improvised, or were some of them more composed or thought out?
You pretty much improvise. That's how I would write. I just would play something, and he'd say, "Oh, that's cool," or "What if we did this?" And we just kind of write the things on the spot, just with either acoustic guitar or an electric guitar. I'd have my Les Paul there, and with an amp, and then he eventually came up to my studio. That I had a studio that wasn't this studio, but a studio before this that Brent came to, and we worked and demoed a lot of the stuff that ended up being like the final vocals for the record and stuff like that. Then we brought in the band after.
So his vocals on the demos ended up being the final tracks?
Yeah, there was no reason to re-record him. The vocals were amazing. The demos were incredible. And his demo vocals, there's no reason to try and recapture that. I think a lot of bands make mistakes trying to recapture the magic of your first impression of a song, and it never is better. Pretty much never. My band, we recorded a whole record, my old band, and then we made a major label record, which was pretty dreadful in comparison. And that just happens, it's very common. The uncommon thing is for the label to realize it and do something about it and use the original one. That's not very common, but usually when labels pay for something, they want to, because their ego gets so invested in it, A&R people, they want to use whatever they were connected with, instead of, hey, is this actually better than the demos or the original versions of the record? And very few people think that that's true. There's an artist named Patty Griffin. I don't know if you ever heard of her, but she's a phenomenal songwriter. She did a record, what is it, Living with Ghosts, back in the mid 90s, and she got signed to A&M Records, and they made a record based around these songs. And the A&R guy said, "I don't like the record. We're going to put out your acoustic guitar demos." And they did, and it was the smartest thing ever. But very few people have enough confidence to do that. Maybe because he was the head of A&R, he's an old friend of mine, and he just said the record wasn't as good as the original recording, so I didn't put it out. But that's like, 1 out of 1,000 people would do that.
So that's pretty common for A&R people to make those decisions, not to go with the original, but do a newer produced version.
Used to be. Nowadays, the music business doesn't even work like that now. Now you get a song on TikTok that becomes a viral hit, and that's the only way you get a record deal.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely transitioned. So you produced for metal artists like Shinedown and rock artists up until 2016. Now in 2016, you began posting on YouTube. It started it started off with your videos showing off your son Dylan's perfect pitch. You do top 20 lists and interviews with other artists. But I think what you might be most well known for is your series called What Makes This Song Great. So for our viewers who might not know what this series is, what do these videos consist of, and what inspired you to start making these?
So I have multi-tracks to a lot of songs, and people always write to me and ask, where do you get these multi-tracks from? Nowadays, I get them just from the artists. Like I did Bohemian Rhapsody with Brian May in the video, and people are like, where did you get the tracks from? It's like, Brian May's in my video. I mean, he sent them to me. So I was, I had this second YouTube channel called Beato too that I've had for 5 years. I just never told anybody about it till about a month ago. And so one night, I mean, I told a few people about it, and I had a few thousand followers on there. And I get on at night and try out new stuff, new ideas. And I was playing multi-track to a song, All the Small Things by Blink-182. And my friend Rhett that got me to start my YouTube channel was listening in. He said, oh my God, you should make that a series. And I had lunch with him next day. And I said, yeah, I could call it What Makes This Song Great. And so then I made a video, the first video, and then I made a second. Now I've made 107 of them.
Was the first video, because I can't remember right now, was the first video All the Small Things, or was it something else?
Yeah, it was All the Small Things, yeah.
So it started out with...
People thought it was interesting because there's this keyboard part that Roger Manning, who was in Jellyfish, he was a session player. He plays just this octave synthesizer thing that you don't really hear in the mix, but it really makes the chorus because it creates this dissonance on the G chord. It's the note C. It's just octave Cs. And when you get to it, it's a subliminal thing, and you hear that dissonance, and it grabs your ear every time you hear it. And it's a really beautiful kind of melancholy sound, and it makes you want to hear the chorus over and over.
Now, when you solo these tracks, like when you decide to do a video of what makes this song great about a certain song, do you discover things that you didn't know about the song before when you separate the tracks, or do you hear these things beforehand and that's how you decide to make them?
Yeah, probably some of both. It's interesting. I did this song Ramble On by Led Zeppelin, and I forget, I was interviewing somebody like Steve Lukather, I think, who's a famous guitar player from Toto. Phenomenal. One of my favorite all-time guitar players. Right. And I think it was him saying that he watched the Ramble On thing, and he said, you know, it got to the B section where you can't really hear the acoustic that clearly, and had no idea that those were the chords there. Or somebody said that. And when you get the tracks isolated, oh, is that what he's playing? I had no idea. Even I always say that, you know, when I hear the things, it's always shocking. So.
Right. So would you say, I mean, obviously you look like you're having so much fun when you're making these videos. Is that, what would you say is your favorite part about, you know, being involved with these songs and really diving deep into them, whether it's discovering new things like in the Toto song, or you know, educating people, exposing all of this stuff to people who these might be their favorite songs, and they might have never heard of this?
Yeah, I love listening to them because I don't sit around and listen to the multi-tracks. I've got thousands of them. And sometimes it's that I start the video and I have never even listened to them. So I'm kind of discovering them as I'm going on. A lot of the stuff, though, I know the songs and I know where the cool drum fills are and I know what the parts are, but I'm always surprised at how well the things fit together. If you listen to the acoustic sound on Ramble On, it's a very odd sound. But when you put the bass and the drums and the guitars and everything in it, and the percussion part that's going on, John Bonham playing on the guitar case or whatever he's playing on, it just all works perfectly together.
Now, when you started doing What Makes This Song Great, the first one was All the Small Things, Blink-182. did you ever think it would progress to the point where you were doing videos with guys like Peter Frampton and Brian May telling stories about all of these songs? Because it's really mind blowing how far this series has come.
No, I didn't. That's it's nothing like I'd imagined. Why I honestly had never even thought of it. I just thought, oh, this is a cool thing. This is a great way to teach people about how songs are put together. Because unless you're a music producer or you've done a lot of records yourselves, most people, and most average people don't know that songs they don't just magically appear. You have to record one part at a time or multiple parts at a time. And I said it to Brian May, the one day Bohemian Rhapsody didn't exist, and then a couple months later the song was done and on the radio. You get the ideas for them, and then you actually have to record each part individually or however they're made. And so it's kind of showing that process is fun, really fun.
Yeah, it definitely sounds fun. So kind of transitioning from that, I want to talk to you about nu metal for a bit. You mentioned it before, but in your What Makes This Song Great video about Freak on a Leash, you said that 80% of the bands that you produced were nu metal bands. So you called yourself sort of a master in the nu metal genre. So from the perspective of a producer and I guess music historian like yourself, what about nu metal do you think makes it so special and unique and stands out to you?
What makes it unique? It's I mean, nu metal was really the last rock movement that was actually a movement in before the fragmentation of music that happened when Napster happened in 1999. So that was the last time the guitar music was really the predominant music, that there was a predominant, that there was a rock movement, that there was, just so many bands that were involved. And there hasn't really been a rock movement since then. That you can find isolated artists here and there. You can find the Greta Van Fleets and that are new artists that are rock bands, but there's not a sustained movement. There's no grunge. There's no Brit rock of the early 90s with Oasis and Blur and all the bands that happened then. Then you had the music of the mid 90s that of female artists, Lilith Fair artists, Sarah McLachlan's and Katie Lang and all the things that happened then. And then late 90s, I mean really early 90s with Korn started, in the early 90s, but nu metal became really big in the late 90s and then lasted really until probably 2012 or so. So that was the last sustained rock movement. And I produced through that entire era, and those were the bands I worked with predominantly. I worked with bands like Need to Breathe, like you mentioned. That's not a nu metal band. And I did plenty of projects that weren't nu metal, but I'd say that was a let's just say this: with all these guitars here, none of them were in standard tuning. Drop B, drop C, drop D flat, drop D, everything. It was like, why do you have 5 Les Pauls? Because they were all in alternate tunings and they had all different gauge strings on them. And so that was kind of the deal. I hardly had anything in standard tuning.
Right. So you just called nu metal the last sort of musical or the last rock guitar movement. What was it like being a musician and producer who was so deep in this movement and so involved in it at the time, from late 90s till early 2010s, like you said?
Well, what was it like? I didn't really think about it, honestly. I was working all the time, so I never had during that I got married and had 3 kids too, so I didn't have much time to think about things. I was just going from record to record, really. That's kind of what producers do, and when you're doing well, you get a lot of opportunities, and that's what I did. So I just made record after record without a lot of thinking about what I was doing at the time.
Well, now that you're, I guess I can rephrase it, now that you're a content creator who makes videos about these songs and these movements, looking back on your experience with nu metal, what do you think was, I mean, I know I've asked this, but what was unique about being a part of that movement yourself as opposed to other bands that you've produced? Because it really is one of the most unique genres, and I imagine as a producer it's probably a unique job.
Well, of the bands that I produce, I mean, Shinedown I wouldn't call a nu metal band. They were more of a rock band, kind of a heavy rock band, right? But I mean, I didn't think about the genre in that way. Every band, you know, from the Deftones, they were more of an alternative band, and Slipknot was kind of nu metal, but not really. And then you had At the Drive-In, and then you had, I mean, there were so many variations of it. It's this, nu metal was such a broad term. You know, when people think of nu metal, I think they think of Korn. I think they think of Linkin Park. But I mean, were the Deftones a nu metal band? Not really. They were kind of an alternative metal band. But you know, it's at the time, it's easy to kind of lump these things together in retrospect, but at the time the bands were very different from one another, and I mean they still are to me, but it's just for simplicity's sake, there's so many subgenres of music, it's easier just to kind of say the nu metal era, which encompassed bands that you know, I mean, Tool put out records during that time period, but Tool is not a nu metal band. They're a metal band, progressive metal band. I mean, I don't know what Tool is. Tool's an amazing band, one of my all-time favorite bands. But it's tough to put labels on these things. I mean, but I think people think Korn of being a nu metal band.
Right. So yeah, that's definitely, I've never heard that point of view before, because, you know, I work at a metal radio station. We just kind of throw out, oh, nu metal, progressive metal, not really thinking about it. But as you've seen metal kind of evolve from a young fan to a producer to now someone who talks about it for a living, talks about rock and metal songs. You recently made a video called Will I Still Listen to Metal When You're Older? And you're mostly speculating about how your music taste will change over time, the same way it's changed over time up until now. But from a producer's perspective who's seen rock and metal evolve almost from its beginning in the 60s and 70s to where it is now, what direction do you see metal going in when you do turn 80 years old?
Well, that's funny, because I was thinking, you know, are people going to be in nursing homes listening to Master of Puppets? Yes, they probably are, you know, eventually. And it's probably not very far away in 20 years. You know, I mean, you know, James and Lars, they're my age, and they're fans. You got to figure they had fans that were older than them, there's people probably in nursing homes now that are Metallica fans that are listening to Metallica right now as we speak. And probably the earlier records, but yeah, I mean, you tend to gravitate towards stuff you listen to that really spoke to you. So so the answer is probably yes. And that was the answer that was in the comments a lot. People were saying, I'm already 75 years old, I'm not in a nursing home, but I listen to metal all the time. But you know, it was more of Iron Maiden and things like that.
Right. So yeah, that was definitely funny what you brought up about people in nursing homes jamming out to Metallica, because you said, you know, now you still listen to all the records that you listened to when you were young, and you know, the young people in the 80s and 90s are probably going to listen to that down the line. But in that video, you were playing along to a lot of newer metal. And when I say new, that's NEW, but you know, a lot of new metal songs
I
and
think
contemporary
I
hits.
played Meshuggah. I played, which is not really new. And I wouldn't say Meshuggah is part of the new metal movement, right? They're a progressive metal band. And I'm a huge, and I'm just, I'm a really big proponent of the progressive metal, instrumental progressive metal, and ones with vocals. Not, and I don't just mean Dream Theater. I'm talking like Periphery and Animals as Leaders and Polyphia and you know, just the Pliny, people like that. A lot of the guitar players that have really great records and are great players, instrumental, the band Intervals, and I love and I promote these people on, they're friends of mine, and I love to have them on my channel, and to me that's a really fresh take on music, and I think it's one of the most interesting genres that's going on right now. And it's a scene, you know, there's these bands all support themselves, they go on tour with each other, and I think it's really a great thing, and to me that's an exciting movement that is a guitar based movement. I think my point about new metal was that it was a popular movement. It's the last big popular guitar movement. I'm not saying that prog metal is not popular, but it's not, you know, the level of Korn that, you know, or those bands that were bigger, Linkin Park, that were worldwide. Linkin Park was famous everywhere, you know, that was a worldwide movement.
Right. Now, would you, going back to what you said about the progressive metal movement, would you say, because it definitely is a scene, but would you say that the internet has fueled that movement a lot, this guitar-based movement?
Yes. Yeah. Instagram is a big place for that. You can see these guys kind of do their thing. And YouTube, definitely. Tim Henson, who plays with Polyphia, he has a big YouTube channel. A lot of bands that are from that movement are big on YouTube, or have done real, you know, are got known through social media. For Misha Mansour from Periphery, he was doing running, you know, like Metallica forums, or I'm sorry, like Dream Theater forums and things like that, where he's you know, and putting out his own recordings of his music. That's where he and Tosin Abasi met, as they met in these forums back in the late, whatever you call them, 2000s, you know, 2007, 2008, 2009. And they became friends through that and started working together. And then Misha started working with Tosin on the Animals as Leaders records, God, 12 years ago now. And those guys been friends and through all that. And so social media has really connected a lot of these bands. That's kind of how they have gone out and toured, and that's how they promote their music. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, social media has obviously been a huge part of not just metal, but music in the past 10 years.
All media. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty much how music gets known in the world now. It's not through radio stations, not really through record labels.
Right. So with that comes a lot of saturation. You know, you see artists, you know, new artists everywhere. How do you think that the internet is going to play a role in rock and metal and just music in general moving forward, maybe in the next 10 years? Because we saw what happened, the crazy digital revolution of the past 10 years up until now. Where do you think it's going to take us moving forward?
Great question. I don't know if I'm ready to predict on where it's going to take us, because I don't know. And I think I'll have to just stay with that. I don't like to make predictions on where music's going to go. But hopefully it'll be good music.
Right. Yeah, I mean,
with guitar solos.
yes, definitely. I mean, I think in the video you did for Freak on a Leash, the Wikipedia definition of nu metal says it rarely contained guitar solos, and I'm like, well, I like nu metal, but I don't like that.
Right.
Right.
That was the thing. That was actually a part of it that that was interesting. Yeah, nu metal did not really contain guitar solos. I can think of a few projects I worked on that were definitely nu metal that had guitar solos, but very few.
Right. So we talked about nu metal already, but another big movement that I want to talk to you about is grunge, because you talk about grunge all the time on your channel. You talked about multiple grunge musicians and songs in one of your more recent live streams where you talked about your channel going forward. You said you might even want to make a documentary about the grunge era. So what is it about that movement, both musically and culturally, in Seattle and in the US? What makes it really stand out for you?
That music really spoke to me. I was in my 20s when grunge happened. Really about 30, I think it was, but those bands, I was into a lot of the bands, the sub pop bands in the late 80s. I had a guitar student that was when I was a college professor that brought in the first Nirvana record, Bleach. And I said, what is this? And he said, oh, this is, indie rock. This is alternative rock. And I was like, what's that? He goes, this is what they play on the college radio stations. It's a really cool band, Nirvana. And they're on Sub Pop. And then, so I started checking out other bands, and I became familiar with a lot of the bands in Seattle. And then when it blew up in the, in the early 90s, I love all those bands. They're just amazing. Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Alice in Chains, Soundgarden. What's not to love? They were incredible. And the music spoke to me because its roots were in the 70s and 70s rock, and had a lot of roots in bands like Led Zeppelin and they had great riffs, and they all had great singers. Every singer for every one of those bands was incredible. Chris Cornell, Lane Staley, Kurt Cobain, Eddie Vedder. They were just unbelievably great singers. And they had such interesting songs. And I'm going to make a documentary on the grunge scene, but from a perspective of the musicians 30 years later, looking back on it. So that's one of my projects that I want to get off the ground, that I'm pretty much ready to get off the ground. So
that's awesome. So when you said that, I was really excited, because I thought to myself, yeah, I don't really know that much. I mean, I know all the surface level stuff about all the bands, but going deeper into what the musicians thought about it. And I imagine you're going to have so much content to go through, just because of the volume of bands that were coming out, that were being pumped out in the early 90s. Would you say, because you said in that video that you did visit Seattle during the era, and everyone had a gig bag, everyone was walking around carrying some sort of instrument. Have you ever seen, whether you were a kid or now, a musical movement that was like that, had that much influence?
No, nothing like that. It was before the internet, though, and people went out and saw live bands, and they had multiple radio stations that supported local music, and that was a huge thing. And plus, Seattle was out in the middle of nowhere, really, the Northwest, and the scene just developed on its own. And these bands were in, you had guys that were in Green River, and then in Mother Love Bone, then in Pearl Jam, and people that, the guys in Temple of the Dog was half of Soundgarden, half of Pearl Jam, and they would all do these projects together, and they were friends, and they kind of all developed together and cross-pollinated different bands, and And it was, you know, if you were a teenager and lived in Montana, Jeff Ament, the bass player from Pearl Jam, he moved to Seattle. That's where he moved. It's kind of like people in the South moved to Atlanta, like I did, even though I'm from New York, but I moved to Atlanta. And you move to the close big city, and then there's a whole scene that develops out of there. I mean, I just had Miles Kennedy on my channel. He was here in the studio last week, and Miles is from, I think Miles is from Spokane, but you know, he's obviously was a kid when that happened, but he's from that area. And there's a real kind of a darkness to Seattle that was part of the music as well. And I find it really fascinating. And I'd love to hear from the surviving people, what their perspective was back then and what it is now looking back on it 30 years later.
Yeah, I mean, I can't wait to see that, hear the musicians' perspectives. I can't wait to see more of your channel going forward. If you are not subscribed to Rick Beato, please go ahead and do that. And of course, ring the bell. If you want to,
you're a pro.
Oh yeah. If you want to see metal, rock, any music you love, he's definitely gone into it and separated the tracks beautifully for it. So anything you want to know about music, Rick's the guy. Please go subscribe. You won't regret it. Rick, thank you so much for doing this. I know you're sort of an unsung hero of the 90s and 2000s metal, and now a very sung hero of metal YouTube and music YouTube. So thank you so much for doing this.
Thanks, Patrick. Appreciate it.
All right. This is Patrick with WSOU 89.5.